All right. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Ruby.
Not just Ruby. Boss.
Yeah, not just Ruby, big boss.
Yes.
All right. So let's start with Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga. On the screen. From the heart of the savior of the 100 deities of the Shita, on the peak of a cloud resembling a clump of extremely white fresh curd, King of Dhamma, omniscient, Losam Drakpa, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me, on lying throne, lotus and moon, my perfect pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme field of merit from a mind of faith, please come for 100 eons to spread the teachings. Your holy mind is the intelligence that understands the full extent of objects to be known. Your holy speech with its excellent explanations is an ear ornament for those of good fortune. Your holy body is radiantly beautiful with glory renowned. To you are meaningful to see, hear and remember are prostrate. Pleasant drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, lights, scented waters, and so forth. Oceans of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated, I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the three vows that I have collected from beginningless time, I confess each and every one with fervent regrets from my heart. You strove for much learning and practice in this degenerate age and made your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the 8 worldly concerns. Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect pure holy gurus from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dhammakaya. Please let fall the rain of profound and extensive Dhamma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. May whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigrated beings, and in particular may it cause the essence of the perfect, pure Losam Drakpa's teachings to shine forever. Sa-shi po-ki chu-shi-me-to tam-ri-ra-mi-shi Ni-de-gen-pa-di Sa-ge-shi-hindu Mi-te-o-wa I-to-ku-na-da Shi-la-chu-pa-shu. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his 2 sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of the victorious one, Losam Drakpa, who had a morality of eminently pure way of life, was courageous in extensive conduct of the sons of victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of the 2 stages of the supreme bliss and emptiness. Yidam Guru Ratnamandalakandiyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beings of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one, enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of the tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas, obscurations, and their imprints without exception. My body become as pure and clear as crystal. So we do the 5-line mixing my prayer in page number 13. We're going to do it 3 times.
Chenrezi Dreaming Kimbe Wambo Jambe Yang Dobo Malu Jonze Sanweda Kanchi Kimbe Tsugi Tsonga Pa Lo Santo Pesha Lo Sowan De Mime Tsewe De Chenrezi Kimbe Wambo Jambe Yang Dobo Malu Jonze Sanweda Kanchi Kimbe Tsugi Tsonga Pa Lo Santo Pesha Lo Sowan De Mime Tsewe De Chenrezi Dreaming Kimbe Wambo Jambe Yang Dobo Malu Jonze Sanweda Kanchin Kimbe Tsugin Tsungapa Lo Sandra Pesha La Soa Sangi Chodon Tsojin Chonon La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyabsun Chi Dagi Chushi Gibin Tsonon Drolan Beje Sangi Drupara Sho Sangi Chodon Tsojin Chonon La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyabsun Chi Dagi Chushi Gibin Tsonon Drolan Beje Sangi Drupara Sho Sanji Chodam Soji Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyabsunchi
Dagi Chinzo
Benji Ben Chonam Ji Drolam Benji Sanji Drupara Sho Kangi Tuzi Nizone Tawa Tamji Pambi Chere Tambi Chun Denze Kwadam Kela Chanse Lo Good morning everyone. Ngantiri Zapa Sanki Lamrim Gotsu Kograsra Ani Redachda Kapkalaya and let Tamboa Senamando and Chik Chuni G Nyamanyong. So it's the date is something Chishugosare, something so much yesra.
So we're gonna go back to the presentation of the steps of the path of enlightenment, the middling Lamrim, as we normally do in the Friday morning sessions. But Geshe sometimes thinks that, at least for someone that is a beginner in this tradition, in the sense that they haven't had the ability to listen to teachings or to study much, Geshe thought that it's good also to include some advice or some some ideas about the Buddhist tradition in general.
Tireda Dinza the Ganzo Tamkila Tuchimo de Democratin Chingi Chusulti, Ranamo Sanji Chusu, and Democratin Ching Ganzolaya, Labsha Sonshayati, Tapchik, Tablamchik, Songoras Ra, that Tapso di Chidayondare. Tabsu di Dungasayak tab Devaduyak tab Dia Aji Anzuchindro Rituk Pigi Rixumaji, that's Simja Tamchiki Samgam Laya Devadevatan, Dungam Devati, Chiguri Yabati, Ti Shila Shabitoni, Chusul to Son Yabati. The Geshe Jatam Siu Shuyoris Ra.
So the teacher, the one that was skilled in means and imbued with great compassion, gave teachings to us due to his great kindness. He gave us Dhamma teachings, Dhamma advice. And the methods that the Buddha taught in his teachings were mainly, as kind of it is commonly known, mainly oriented towards accomplishing the happiness that we seek and removing the suffering that we do not wish for. So the methods, the techniques that the Buddha taught were oriented towards that, in recognizing that living beings within the 6 realms of existence, without any distinction between them, equally want to be happy and none of them wants to suffer. So based on that, the recognition that all of us, the 6 realms of existence, all of us equally want to be happy and we do not want to suffer, the Buddha gave teachings, Dhamma teachings.
kegoya dewa dribigi tablaya kegoya ani chik chu missing engine bayana samgam laya big lengi laya dewa da dungam deva yavansa dindigi dewa dribiya tab dunga saya tab chedo ani chik sanji gi chulaya jubayana ani jubi godin dribiya gi kebachi yungu yosare sira.
So then the teacher giving teachings, or anyone that is teaching this tradition or putting it into practice, they do that in taking into consideration that the goal is to cultivate happiness and well-being and to remove suffering. But even if you haven't engaged with this tradition yet, in a sense that even if you do not consider yourself as Buddhist, even if you're not Buddhist, you can still look at the different things that you do and recognize that you're seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to remove suffering. So then, if that's your beginning point, being non-Buddhist, and you then get involved with the Buddhist tradition, you do that on the basis of recognizing that your main motivation, your main goal is finding tools for happiness and for removing suffering.
Teresa dinza karso dachi sanji dedu dunga seya da dewa dribi ki tab gu chuzul ti song di ge ramba damasu na ni toni ra ta zu di rangi dunga seya gi tab rangi dewa dribi ki tab che du song sha ju chi ani shengi dedu la mingni ani song sha ju ni ra bigi tewa chechong si labna malamna tanda di rangda shenla tuni ani song sha ju chik chagdos.
So then the Buddha taught tools for cultivating happiness and well-being and for removing sufferings. And we can recognize two levels of those tools or methods that the Buddha taught. One level is using tools for accomplishing happiness and well-being for the sake of oneself, for removing suffering for the sake of oneself. That's the first level. The second level of tools that the Buddha taught were tools for cultivating happiness and well-being for the sake of others, and likewise for removing their suffering. So we might use certain terminology within the Buddhist tradition. We might call it the Mahayana tradition or the Mahayana or Hinayana. But even if we don't use those terms, we can just recognize the tools, techniques for cultivating personal happiness and well-being and removing one's own suffering and pain. And also tools and techniques for that take the orientation, cultivate an orientation towards others and focusing on cultivating happiness and well-being for their sake and also removing their suffering.
Miyu Koran rang slawandi rang gerba michik sorach ro michik chagdos ta shen slawandi ani namkita da nyambi simjan tamji shen shibi tsigdinan duyanza miyu gachya dos ro tinza shen gichedu chöche bayna chödi gachya da rang gichedu chödu bayna chödi ani gachwa yimba di miyu Koran tonda drup tuya chigre dos ro.
So then if you make your focus yourself, if you just focus on yourself and wishing yourself to be happy and to be free from suffering, you can think that, well, your orientation includes only one person, just me, the personal self. Whereas if your focus, if your observation is all other living beings that extend to the reaches of space, your observation is vast and extensive. That orientation is vast and extensive. So we compare those two types of orientations. One of them is vast and extensive. The other one that focuses only on oneself is narrow.
Bena dedu gni zushiandia dedu gitsawadi rang cheban zimbale teni dongar yungu yobatan shen cheban zimbale teni deva yungu yobachi sungudo sanji rang pigi chik ni ngau nyambigi ani nganzin di shuk che tawaina and tell a tembi tamandiba, makiba, big lu madeba, sem makiba, Geshe Jatamba Pemambuch Yungi Yobati, Tanganzu Nyoy Turislam, the Chogorasra. That tea Lutani, so negab chick dema de tes yomba tea junzen de chini, and a simjan tamjig madeba the magivadi, and ngala yon and dig to a show samsongi, and simjan tamjig devajon and ngatri magiva chonanga michiri, keomari samsung, tinjig and logic get to Vaina, and so big lusam madiatia. And shoot them as on the children drag. But Dindi Jazziadam Yungios is.
So then looking at the way that we experience happiness, the reality of happiness, and well-being, the reality of suffering and pain, we can see that for us personally, the way that they arise depends upon our own self-cherishing. So we experience happiness, or we experience certain degrees of happiness, or we experience certain degrees of suffering and pain. It depends upon the strength of our own self-cherishing. Whereas as the Buddha taught, when you change your orientation and you come to cherish others, your happiness and well-being grows stronger and stronger. And we can see that based upon our personal experience when we have a strong sense of I. When we have a strong clinging to I, to me, it creates states of mind which we feel uncomfortable, not well. It brings about sometimes physical unwellness or pain, suffering, and also mentally it brings about mental unhappiness. We can see that based upon a personal experience. So then if we, rather than staying entrenched with our self-cherishing attitude, when we find ourselves in situations when we feel unwell physically or mentally, we can then change our orientation to think about others and recognize first of all that just like me, others are also experiencing states in which they're unwell. So that by me experiencing my current state of being unwell, may I be able to take upon myself the unwellness of others. So if we can do that, if we can change our orientation in this way, we will find that the mental unhappiness or physical discomfort will be reduced.
Dire dinzal hagdon di danganzu dongan dugumewa zam mindu gi donga delaya lusum gi devani ra lusum gi devani yobatita nganzu hakogras tichidi Lug devadi lug dongardi jonya gi kenza tsoro di penati natsala soba ani ra ani tekom la soba tinji gi toni ani lug donga yunguyora ta di anko ani tarang ji ani tela pabi gi ji ani menda kazela soba da tindile deni segoyaji mato chik semgnang gi saunlo tani ani sayadi kunguyuda Mansambaro Redwas. That's same Gdungadi, same Gdungadi, and same Gsanglotandanji Tony Segoyadi, Yanko Chungi Rodanji Chagores.
So then when we recognize that I do not want to suffer, I do not want suffering and pain, we can also recognize that we experience suffering or pain on two different levels. There is the physical level and the mental level. So with the physical suffering that we experience, we can look at different sources of suffering. Like, for example, you might get sick and thereby experience suffering and pain. Or there are pains which are related to hunger and thirst and so forth. So our ways of dealing with this physical pain rather than working with the mind can be through employing physical means. Like, for example, when you get sick, you take your medication. When you feel hungry or thirsty, you have food, drinks, and so forth. But when a mind is suffering, when a mind is feeling pain, the way to address that is through the mind. This is naturally, right? This is a natural thing to address mental suffering with mental states.
Diri bina nganzu ta sem dunga chishu dia sem ki dunga di sem magi bi ki dunga di pe chik karso ta ting koran tsu chik magi wa chik yongya do asirwa o tinti kabla ya yang kogab yagbu chik susu kogab di tamzin chituwa na ten kogab yagbu chik len yosares shu chik magi bi kala ya sem shu chik magi bi kala ya ngaki bu mandu samsamgi lo chik yorwas ti kabdu la ya ngaki bu mandu sambi gi ngati pigi la ya ani seju chebaya na ani chik ngati ngonzi chi toya gi tabshi yakshu di kab tudi pena shu chik be ngaki bu du sambi kabdu la ya shu chik dewa nyome kabdu la shu chik tso dunga nyome kabdu la ani pigi ngao nyambi lo la ya nga shartan di ngonzin che to ya tabshi yakshu jik son yores tinti to la ya ani lo drivni samlo tang tu ba na sem gu dunga di gyacha gyatamba seya la shu pengi yosares.
At times we experience deep suffering, and we can recognize how that experience depends upon the mind. And it also give us this opportunity to look at our own mind and address it. So when we recognize how suffering depends upon the mind, we get this good opportunity of investigating it. We can, for example, look at how we react when we have suffering. When we think, I'm unhappy, I'm so unhappy. So look for the sense of I that arises in your mind and try to identify the I, the me, that experiences suffering. So this deep experience of suffering or unhappiness gives you the opportunity to recognize what is the I, what is me. And similarly, it might be that we experience a state in which we have this great sense of happiness, extreme happiness or well-being that arises in our mind. And again, it gives us this opportunity to recognize the sense of self that we have, to recognize I, to recognize me.
Diri dinza pigi ta chik soso pigi desa tabal dechine dini nga kibu mundu sambi nga ngonzin chibi kabdula ya ani liu chashi soso pa chene ngi lagba ngi ngo ngi pigi suk ngi ani sem serik remado ani dela ya nga lagba dela min dinga wa nyamba ngola min dinga wa nyamba di nganzul lengi la yungu mandas tu spachi se on dige ani chi nga kibu mundu sa nga ti tsawa ni chi pigi lagba tamasun chansa marabi loji leba ina ani nga kibu mundu seagi ani magibi lodi mala rana ro jredo asra.
So when you use that opportunity to employ this investigation, when you become focused on that investigation, you can see that it does affect the experience of unhappiness or happiness that you experience at that moment. Like, for example, as we said, there are states in which you find yourself extremely unhappy. And there is that strong sense of I that appears to your mind when you're unhappy. So you look for that sense of I that appears to your mind and you try to pin it down. Can it be found within the body, within the different parts of the body? When I feel so unhappy, can this I that feels unhappiness can be found within the hands, the legs, the head, different parts of the body, the shape of the body, and so forth? When you investigate in this way, you see that you cannot find the I when you look within the different parts of the body. And when you see that there is a strong sense of I that arises with that mental unhappiness, and yet if you look for that I, you cannot find it, certainly that a great sense of unhappiness of the self will be diminished.
Diri the di yonga karasana dinti samlo tawon digi pigi gi chi nganzu dunga yonga gi shetsa zo di chagdang res son yores ro chagdang di ngau nyambi gi pe nga singi di su khana ya te mo go ma chi su su rawang to ne chi yebi chanang di gi lo ti kenza chechine ani mari walle ti wangi chabadan control soba chechine semba magiba yonya dia ti yungu yoras tel tembi lu madeba yonya tinza bi nga ti ngunzi chejine nga cheba chechine nga singidi yacha gyatamba chig zuzu saji mani bi samlo di shu kazu chirwa ti zogi ani marigban dacha shedan samalo ya be ni gyuni nendrech tinne ondi dungar gi tsawa kora lagdrech du sine ani rodanji sungdo as sangi wichela ya.
So think about it when suffering arises in your mind. You can see how also suffering arises from anger and attachment. There is the sense of self that arises in your mind when anger and attachment operate. It seems to you that this sense of self is an independent self, an autonomous self. It comes from ignorance, right? So ignorance brings about, gives rise to anger and attachment. And anger and attachment give rise to unhappy state of mind, which also affect our body. A body feels uncomfortable when those states of mind operate in our mind. So we then employ this analysis and investigation, trying to see if we can point at the I or the me that arises in our mind, whether it can be found within analysis and investigation. So when we employ that mode of analysis and investigation and see that although there is just strong sense of self or me that arises in those occasions, when you look for I or me, you cannot find it. It starts to bring down anger and attachment. It certainly undermines, it harms the continuity of anger and attachment, and thereby also your mental unhappiness decreases.
Ko gyugenjila deni yungu yanza pena sem gu dunga dawa di sem magiba yongya di ani chik samlo pigi samlo tangtang chik norwa teni ro samlo tangtang mashiba senada samlo tangtang norwa o dindi chik samlo nongchu jila teni ani sem tu yoba di gyase gyares nga pe chik shue yosra ngema nganzu tangtang pigi gyaga loshola yore ani Put face tanda lo nyush tsab din tsab gijire. Koran lo nyush tsakchik tsani tabajile yaz. Semgam nachi, semba magiba chan. Ani pe ngamra chaw tsaw cha songza. Ani nyimajila genga, ani dus, ani samlo tang, nyimajila ngegi samlo ngarangi, samlo chumegi tanga yobati, kutsor songzi. Samlo chumegi, nge samlo chumegi tanga du samlo, tsorwa dene songni, kus semban pigi Shimiyadi bed lasalas.
Suffering of body and mind arises from cause and conditions. And a mental unhappiness thereby also arises from cause and conditions. And we can certainly see how the way that we think affects our happiness or unhappiness. Mistaken ways of thinking certainly contribute to our unhappiness. Our mind becomes disturbed because of a mistaken way of thinking. So like, for example, one of Geshe's friends in India, now is about 27, 28 years old, was going through some rough time when he was 21. He experienced, there was a period in which he was depressed, in which he was anxious, and he told Geshe that one day he was looking at his mind, and he was kind of looking at his state of mind, and he recognized how futile it was to hold on to that state of mind. And he says that just recognizing the futility of that state of mind was something that was so powerful that this mental agitation, mental disturbance started to relax. Just that mere recognition of the futility of that state of mind. And it says just that recognition at the end made his depression, his anxiety go away.
These are Nyamlin Chiong Suzuki Samlo Nongtuk Shoguyaba and it's Chava Nongtuk Shoguyaba Nongtuk to Munzin Chitubana and Karina and his Science Dinza 아니 지 당가주 참말로야 고 코월 니비린래야 가드이나 지 참만디와지 수이나 용기어스 디라 디코 코월 마타바도 참만디와 용용바지 가서 기요나코 텔데민 데브트웨 임바라스 이나야 아니 지 비기 예경 그 싸워 도서 지 수수고 온 트여야기 체도 지 원트여야기 체도 되니 라라말야 소다고였는데 아니 페나직 생아딘디 사고였는데 페나 믹제마 덩겨와였는데 어딘지 민네 소다면 되니 지 페나 믹제마도 딩고카시 담바이나 카요 라요 그 편도용 그래서 아니 존나 직비기 따지 이담 그 생아딘디 아니 당신 여바나 편도배 자세 자담 편도용 그래서
So then the way of thinking, we can recognize that through this way of thinking, we act in a mistaken way. And we act in a mistaken way, certainly mental unhappiness or also sometimes physical discomfort arise and grow. The mere recognition that this is what happens, that we have a mistaken way of thinking, that we therefore act in a mistaken way, the mere recognition of them is so instrumental in clearing them away. And this is what we do in our Buddhist practice, right? So in our Buddhist practice, we recognize our way of thinking, and we also recognize how we act in a mistaken way. And we also recognize that so long as we remain in samsara for that long, we'll come across states in which things will not work out for us. There's always something that is not quite right in samsara. This is part of the recognition that we develop. We recognize that this state of within samsara causes us to act in a certain way, which is not wholesome, which is not correct, which is a mistaken way of acting, and that brings about a result that we do not seek. So if we recognize that, or if we develop the wish to recognize that, we take steps for doing that. For example, we make prayers, we make supplications to the lamas. May I be able to recognize that? We recite mantras for that end. We might recite the Mixima verse. If you have a deity practice, a Yidam practice, and you do some recitation of mantras, you can also do that when thinking that this is what I want to recognize. This is what I want to identify. I want to identify my mistaken way of thinking and my mistaken way of acting, because they bring about results that I do not seek.
Yidam bena ta Yidam 그 생각하고 있으려나 아니 Yidam 그 생각하리나 삼삼도 고 코리아기 양 고 코리아기 귀찮나 양 지금도 왔으러 두치디 bena ta Yidam 지다 망부여레스 이나야 Yidam 조디 비 bena Yidam 도진 지시다고 찬송 바이나 아니 지준 잠비야 비 따지 잡은 남발이야 신샤바치 차고레스 따 지준 잠비양 슬라운디 비 따지 사이 남바치스는 지준 잠비야 비 당아준 콘다다신 당가딘디 제도서 따딘디 이나야 디조디 아니 산지 탐지기 투규기 아니 셔럽직도 되네 하샤샤바치 야 아니 지준 잠비양 쉬고요레스 도르드나 아니 산지 탐지기 투규기 아니 셔럽텔야 지준 잠비양기 센서 샤교소르 차가도스 디지디 셔럽디 카레스라운디 비기 다메바 네루 톰바니 토비 셔럽 디차고연자 지기 아니 율 간다지 임바이나야 지 르이 파타바자마도 유코랑기 띵니 아니 지 셀니 니주 메바디 아니 율디 네루레스 딘지 토라야 톰바니 토라야 삼로 칸라 칸스미 단체 아니 디니 아니 톰바니 토비 셔럽비리야 아니 지 꺄비 조소니 디 타드 트비 이담 엔 도진 지지게 생각배나 옴시티오 따는 홈페 오나 오야멘 따가 홈페세 식벤 주데운도스 어딘지 팅고 카시 장토바나 자세 자담 팽그리스로
So we might also do a recitation of the mantra of Yidam in meditation on deity. And since we mentioned that, you might wonder, what is it? What is a mantra of a Yidam, a meditational deity. So we have many different deities in the Buddhist tradition. One of them is, for example, the deity Vajrabharava, which is a wrathful manifestation of Manjushri. So Manjushri arises into the form of the wrathful Yamantaka, which is a practice that we employ in the mantra tradition, on the mantra path. From a sutra perspective, Manjushri represents or is the embodiment of the wisdom of the Buddha. So the particular type of wisdom that we think of in relation to that is the wisdom of selflessness. In that whatever exists, for example, a self, is only imputed by language and conceptions. If you look for it, you're not going to be able to find it or to point your finger at it. It is only imputed by awareness. So you think about it, and then through that you also turn to your object of refuge. You do a deity practice, like for example, you might do a Yamantaka practice, and the representation of Yamantaka Vajrabharava can be found in statues or tankas and so forth. Anyway, you do this practice, and through thinking of these points, you also do a mantra recitation. So you can do, if you're doing a Vajrabharava practice, then you might recite the mantra Om Rishti or Om Yamantaka Humpe and so forth. You do this practice in keeping in mind those points, and certainly it will be beneficial, 100% guaranteed that it will be beneficial.
Om Rishti Hugitana Humpe says Chanzan.
Om Rishti Hugitana Humpe. That's the full mantra. For the lazy ones who say only 2 words.
Concentrate Samara. Dangin Dindi or Dindi Chinero. And Miximadi Taspig Shangoj in the Shaji Mayimba. And Choju Java said the Chibi 2 Yugi and Sherab Dan, 7 inches Chambo, and Chilean Nibatamchi Chik to Dune, and me number Chanjava, and Rixum Chik Du Dani, Jangolo Matsunga Chambo, a Dindichi, Kanji Sosu, Mebachi Tubaina, a Dindich Yungores, or Dindich Sigores, Ra. The D is on deputy, Mixima Pigita, Nagordi, Downmaring, Shigordi, Tommy, and it's Jangola Matsunga Chimbi, Kongilama, and it's John Rendavalaya, Son deputy, and it's Shigordi Mato, Yomaresra, and Tsunasha Yuti Shigord Chagados, or Dara Dana Digoresra, that didn't be out to another Yaburasra, Matunaya, Shigord Dana Digoresra.
Or similarly, you can do a recitation of the verse of Mixima. And we do that not because we have a certain loyalty to the Gelug tradition. We can do that in recognizing that Lama Tsongkhapa is the embodiment of the protectors of the 3 lineages, embodying the aspect of wisdom, the wisdom of selflessness, the aspect of compassionate love, the aspect of ability. So all of those aspects are embodied in one being, in Lama Tsongkhapa. So if we visualize Lama Tsongkhapa in front of us and keeping in mind those aspects, the embodiments of the protectors of the 3 lineages, and we make supplications in doing this visualization, we can do the recitation of the 4-line Mixima verse. We don't necessarily have to do justify. We can also do the 4-line Mixima verse. Actually, this verse was composed by Lama Tsongkhapa in addressing his master, Jetsun Rendawa. In turn, what Jetsun Rendawa did was to turn this verse back to Lama Tsongkhapa. So he used this 4-line verse. Later on, more other versions of this verse came about, 5-line Mixima verse, and so forth. So if you add on top of, if you use other versions that are more expensive, of course, it's good. But if you can't do that, then it's all right to do just a 4-line Mixima.
Manyon des tembe so tameba sabing debula jobanam jikan di gutamji sa mugujan chachisa gosos.
Anyway, having said that, let's go back to the text, because there's a danger that if we continue in this manner, it will turn out to be a talk that is given in a kind of really disorganized way all over the shop. So having said that, when we go back to the text, we are looking at the steps of the path, which are shared with those of small capacity. Currently, we're looking at the topic of karma. And specifically, we've been talking about the general characteristics of karma. So of the 4 general characteristics of karma, we're going to pick up from the 3rd one, which explains how you do not experience the results of actions that you have not done before. You do not meet up with results of actions that you have not done. So looking at the text, you do not meet with karma you have not created. If you have not accumulated karma that will become the cause for experiencing happiness or suffering, you will never experience the happiness or suffering that is its effect. Also, those who enjoy the effects of the teacher's accumulation of an incalculable accumulation of merit do not need to accumulate all its causes. However, they need to accumulate one part of them.
Terda di be yagbun doasra nganzu semshu ki uhebachi tini chagwarda nganzu semshu ku mandan di zambala semshu ki mandan di ani dunga yungu doas ra ta dandi chalaya dandi kawlaya nganzu chi kibu yongya dia ngungi leom ngung sa shabi gyu sa shaba teleteni 단단 제부디 뇽구여바 디시우레스 데바이나다 둥아이나다 웅 레사 샤발 때네 단단 뇽구여바 디 임바이나 마웅바 데바 용다 둥아 용 마용디 아니 다다이 아니 수수기 룽아 이송기 자발야 라리 데고여반자 아니 슈 딤치네 단다버둥아라 마시 몸비왕게 가리나 직문두타 지 야구지 차문도 딱 멍보다 sabso 치고 삼성 그 셈슈기 지어봐나 가리는 제투고 그랬어. 가리는 제투고 그랬어.
So if we develop a certain courage, determination, we'll find ourselves in a positive state. But without courage, without determination, it might be that we're not going to be able to accomplish much. We might experience suffering or discomfort because of a lack of courage. So we recognize that whatever we experience arises and depends upon causes and depends upon karma. If we are happy at the moment, if we are well at the moment, we can recognize that it occurs because of karma that we have accumulated before, because of causes that we have created before. It is the same for whatever happiness or suffering that we experience. So in thinking about it, we can think that being the case, let's look at the future. Whatever happiness I will experience in the future, whatever suffering I will experience in the future, they arise and depends upon my actions of body, speech, and mind. So if I do not behave well at the present, it will have a negative effect on my future.
제 간스나 nganzu 피기게 nganzu 미르와스 nganzu라 미 남주 지여와스 라 미 남주 피기게 직 네바데 뎀비게 미 남주 말라 바르도 피 얘니 직 양랑알라 소바다 디라 카르무 강강한테 바이나야 강한테 바이나야 고 아니 데바 드비야기 아니 탑 아니 찬상 여대유지 라 돈로 더지나 상단식 말에 발람나 년식 말에 소수기 남주 튼투 말에 강해 체다면도 양피직 아니 레벨의 견쇼지 아니 미케지시나 녜미싱이 소수 상도 담미싱이 차대여반다 동아라뇽 데르마도 패신 내가 탑시면도 다디 마인디 만주 미 레벨 견메바 비 미케지시나 녜퉁이 소수 상도 땅투 갑들라 아니 semshuk zawani chago gumda semshuk machabeton 가리는 게 최고 삼비 로드지 깨봐야나 아니 지 동아 총자리 아니 다가랑라야 아니 매드야 딘디 용구여서레스로 간지 간주 셈슈라야 라레 되버지 원 디기 레생이 디기 고아치글야 아니 셈슈 끼야지 내든 땡구도 하서라
As human beings, we have intelligence, we have wisdom. It might be that physically something will be not right. It might be that our limbs or parts of our body will be impaired. But still, it does not mean that we cannot develop our mind, that we cannot use the intelligence, the wisdom that we have as human beings. We can make full use of our human intelligence, even if there's something serious happening to us in our body. Whereas if we are born in another state of existence, like for example, as an animal, we're not going to be able to think. Animals are incapable of thinking about their current situation in a way that we are capable of doing that as human beings. They cannot listen to an explanation, understand an explanation, and therefore, if you find yourself in a situation which is similar to that, in that you cannot understand a certain explanation, you cannot understand your situation, you cannot listen to a particular explanation, you cannot understand it, you will still be entrenched in suffering. So this is not our situation. For us, we do not have a serious impairment that prevents us from doing so. We're not mentally impaired. We can clearly understand explanations and advice that is given to us. So if we then make sure that we do not become faint-hearted, if we develop our courage, if we develop our determination in thinking that I can certainly do something about our situation, we can use that in order to eliminate that pain and suffering. So thinking about karma empowers us to do so. Thinking of karma gives us the determination to develop courage and the ability to change our situation.
Thank you. Derida, tinza le sedi le kedik sedi tenda do diro nganju bi kejak ton shejabana yaguchina yaguchagres dugjachina dugjachagres di tenda redo asra.
And as we mentioned karma, what it means is that we have negative or virtuous actions which produce their own effects. They produce positive effects or negative effects.
Tere dijidi pena andinalo ya tembokarin chingi mombozo sangi adi kawa thame balaya ra kawa thame basla da ta khanda da dusro tinti chilaya ani phemba dinti tanche nge kawa thame ba gyunin drogo chona ya drochini kaligya insan bi tamja di shachini ani kawa thame balaya ani sosa droba janchini sanji kombo tobsha ju redos tinza nganzu gi chi ani gebjur di pi chi chuzu kashi nanglo ya chi drubya sorojda tundra kashi chi lo kashi ji ya chi shujin drubya gi miyu te makhe ba kanji miyu de mantra de ngi chego asambi gi tamja chi sha to ba na tende kheba yosares.
It says here, also those who enjoy the effects of the teacher's accumulation of incalculable accumulation of merit do not need to accumulate all its causes. However, they need to accumulate one part of them. So it refers here to the Buddha having attained the state of enlightenment, having accumulated the accumulations over 3 great countless eons, thinking all along of attaining the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. So the Buddha has made effort over such a great time to accumulate the collections in order to be able to be of benefit to sentient beings, in order to be able to be of benefit to us. So then in thinking also of the way that we open our mind to listen to the instructions or to advice of the Buddha, rather than being focused on the short term and thinking that I have to accomplish it within just a few days or a few weeks and thereby great change will come. If we also think about it as a long-term process, we will get benefit from that.
Shivani Shivani legi megi cheban namki yedomo mongin jebin jimbate keban pardole transit namni gedita chebalan jimpoma kyoji chechu musata mache badan temeson sheda tengiz gyabole kya teyan chene rebal mungurmin jengi cheba tsowan gyowa me chedan longle kya lenam kawa gyayan chumusawa tsotan tu
Now, the fourth general characteristic of karma is karma you have created does not dissipate, does not go to waste. It says the virtuous and non-virtuous actions that have been done will bring forth pleasant and unpleasant effects. We have a few sources to prove that. In the Praise of the Exalted One, it says, Brahmins claim that good and bad deeds are transferable like gifts one receives. You teach that deeds done are never lost and what is not done will not be met. Also, the King of Concentration Sutra also says, what is done will never be met. What is done will never not be met. What others did, you will not experience. Finally, the chapters of scriptural transmission says, actions never come to naught, even after 100 eons. When the time comes and the conditions are met, beings will surely experience their effects.
Yeah.
So there is also a question here from Nicole. The question is there a time frame for this future in relation to karma? Do positive or negative consequences happen in this life? Or is karma banked into the next life or reincarnation? Dila matso tanda lechik sawaina maombala jevo dis sangyen yongres ne chilagrwa maomba se adila khalagres di se di jemala lagirves yamene kewa chimala lagirve kemachima chimala yonsigrves kandechinas
maomba se dita kejingibane jongyur kejingibane maomba seres ra
Rene Pejetua de la Kalagioresana. Mombasa de Kewa said the Chikpola Lagerbe, Yamana Kewa Chimalayan de Jachogres.
Kangala Jachogres. Kanji and two kejingibane, jongyur kejingibane, and Tsengashi Tamjelia.
So the future begins the moment after the current moment, which means the next moment after now is, you could say, is the future. So the question is it limited only to this life, so that actions we perform now will bring result in the future? Do we mean the future only in terms of this life? No, this future is unlimited. It can also extend beyond this life, right? After all, within the Buddhist tradition, we speak of the existence of past and future lifetimes. So actions done in this life bear results in future lifetimes as well.
The long time the long lay said, Kawa Gayani, Lenum Kawa Gayan, Chumusavan, Sodan Tu, Nina Lieutenant Devitan John Guanis, Kanji le di Sane Mas Lesane Mashana. And lady Kawa Jason by Naya, Kokora, Piggy, any Eugene Sobaina, Lady Eugene Sobaina, Jebumia, Ken Sobaina, and Jebud Mingris.
In the third citation in this section from the chapter of scriptural transmission, it says, actions never come to naught, even after 100 eons, which means that you might have performed an action and then later on confessed it and purified it. But if you don't do that, actions never come to naught, even after 100 eons. In that they are still there. And once they encounter their suitable conditions for being activated, you will experience the result of those actions.
The things I'm going to give a Thomas Meva said, the killing the give a Thomas Mevan Tanda for the le this sagdan the masa bigi zawni kazu chumutu ba chagwanza le gewa sayore le magiwa sayore tinzang ju sem gu tolaya ge megi ane pacha bigi chi ane ming toya yujina da be tukbu shuch 차대요라 진짜 다 디기 아니 레익사비기 직비기다 바차디 민 제브 종다 문종디 제브 뇽다 문종디 랑기 아니 비기 다디기다 아니 차왈야 아니 깬라야 라리고연자 아니 게베 바차 깬란 줘야기 아니 규지 드바이나 아니 게베 바차 미용그레스 Megi Pacha gi Kenlan Droya gi and Chavaji Chebayana, Megi Pacha Minchin, Dunga Yungu Yores. Tinza and Lamrim Nalaya, Chu Tadanin Chegor Sadi, Diredas, Chu Tadanin Chego Kasna, and Ganzu Devan Dunga Dugumevanza, John Gur Dunga Zawanin Mayon was Chegona, Tada Pigi and Gevi Pacha Yodeva Telea, and soon Devshigi. 아니 개와 코나 드바이나 아니 개위 파자 민거마도 미기 파자 민거 말했어. 로 딘딘도지 딘디지 삼로다니 아니 샘나로야 오늘 자니기 샘띵기 아니 이치드 디여바이나 깨지자다 뭐 두그러다 딘메바이나 아니 그 나만한신진 차당기 상황도 손진 로데바나 미기 파자 세용 그래 아니 마기바데 랑기 낭길레데야지 딘디지 자기 Yoris that dom direndosra.
So when we speak about karma, we speak about negative actions, so non-negative actions, non-virtuous actions that we have done before, or virtuous actions. And taking into consideration that we have been around since time without beginning and up until now, and that being the case, we cannot say definitively that I have not performed this action or the other action. We have already done all varieties of actions since we've been here since time without beginning and up until now. And therefore, when we think of the virtuous actions and non-virtuous actions that we have already done before, if we have committed negative actions, serious negative actions before, at some point they will bear the negative effect, which can be very serious. We will experience the result of that. Now, in order to experience the results of actions that we have done before, the imprints that we have placed upon a mental continuum need to be activated. So the activation depends upon actions that we do at the present. The way that we behave, the actions that we take at the present, act as conditions for the activation of karmas that we have accumulated before. So for example, if we behave in a positive way, positive actions act as conditions for activating virtuous karma that we have accumulated before. And similarly, if we behave in a negative way, negative behavior acts as condition for activating non-virtuous karma that we have accumulated before. And this is why it is important to pay heed to one instruction that we find in the Lamrim tradition, which says, we need to practice right from now. Right from now, we need to practice, which means that if we take into consideration that we seek happiness and well-being, we do not want to suffer. If we act in a virtuous way, we will then make sure that we provide the conditions for positive karma, virtuous karma to take effect. And non-virtuous karma will not take effect. So if we develop mental trust in that process, complete trust in that process, we can do that. Whereas if we don't have trust in the working of karma, and we still allow our mind to be governed by anger, attachment, and so forth, they will act as conditions for the activation of negative karma, for non-virtuous karma that we have done before, which will result in unpleasant states in this life.
Tirda gedi ki pacha ki ken la drum rusedi injimi ki pe ani pena che ting sabuch mashibana ani geve pacha ki ken la mundu wache da jig sabu jig shibayana kianlan driving nebasi kemundo asra zo di nela kema keroji benangan zuta ani pigi bena shindola soba ro ani medola soba koranjong pigi yonya di nela kewan di chaba nyinyu stamayana lamsang ke yonya ro ko tutso da tinti nela magina ni chik chu kazu luk shabayana ya ani rudoya da magiba din yungdos o dinanshingi nela kewa chetubayana ani mulam chi gyabayana ya ani gewi pacha meya chik yungresro mulam yagbu chik pena suzu chik pigi shuji singa mebayana ya chik ani ngegi mitsendi ani simjan tamjela ya chik pendi tungi chik yuwansho samsongi samting mulam chi gyabayana ya shuji tuchembu o dindi yungu yores ro.
So we have placed imprints of virtuous actions and non-virtuous actions, negativities and virtuous actions in the mind stream. And even if our understanding of the Dhamma is not deep and profound at the moment, we can still affect the course of karma. You might think that in order to affect the course of karma, I need to understand the Dhamma deeply. But still, you can develop expertise in certain areas, which mean that even if your understanding is not deep and profound, you can still affect very well the course of karma. It's like, for example, when you look at fruits or flowers that grow, they grow in season. And if you're at least an expert with respect to when to grow the right thing, then you can take little actions that will ensure that you will get nice results out of flowers, fruit, and so forth. If you're planting things out of season, you're watering them and so forth, because they're out of season, it could mean that the seeds that you plant will rotten in the ground, or that it will not have other right conditions in order to grow and develop. So you need to have those expertise. And sometimes there are expertise in just a limited range of activities, but still, because of expertise in those limited things, you can still get good results. So if we become, for example, experts or very skilled in developing a positive intention in our prayers, for example, in our aspirational prayers, we make sure that they become very virtuous, we can, through that, get a good result. Like, for example, through developing that heartfelt positive intention, may I be able to provide others with benefit and happiness. May I be able to be of benefit to others. This way of developing a motivation, our intention, ensures that we accumulate a great virtue, that we create great virtue. So becoming, for example, an expert in doing stuff like that for us can be very effective.
tab debu shu che debu shu chagen pen zom le lao ro yang pi kolong go das ra teba ta ani chi samba nam da chi go das ma do pen na su su chu ba kan chu ba kan tong ba ne ya nge chu de tong ba de ne an chi sim jan tham chi pen de tu bi ani ne ba de ma ji yon sho samba na de la ya ke ke ma do as ro ngone sem tin din di song dan tu ba na shu ji lab chin cha go 소사 쇼치하고서 아니 게 게위 파차세기 게 풀트촌 직 차가도서
So in some sense, you can say that practicing Buddhism can be made so easy. It's quite easy to practice Buddhism. But still, one thing that you need to consider is that it depends upon your motivation, your intentionality, which needs to be a virtuous motivation. And if you do have that virtuous motivation, even simple actions can become very powerful. So for example, even drinking a glass of water can become powerful if you think, I'm going to do that in order to be able to be of benefit to sentient beings. And if you develop that genuine motivation, may I be able to be of benefit to other sentient beings, you accumulate a great accumulation or a great degree of accumulation, but also it can act as conditions for the activation of virtuous karma that you have accumulated before.
And dindi ke keba shu yo maris benangan chigen rojina sok chobi chigen rojina ya ani kawkala ya kapchigi ya pigi ani sok chogro ya bena lu tsachik tes mandina ani lamsang ani shidro ya dindi yungoras kawkala ya pigi mota dabche and gocha kangbacha lagbacha na ya ani tandatsu chayo ya dindi yungoras tinza and
when we speak of conditions here, it doesn't mean that those conditions have to be really significant. We can have different levels of conditions. You can have slight conditions, you can have great conditions, but it's not that in order for a certain virtue to take effect, you only need a great condition to play its part. We can see that, for example, in terms of, the conditions that cause our death. Sometimes a condition can be quite slight, like, for example, you might be pricked by a needle, and that can cause you death. It could be something slightly wrong with one of the one small blood vessels in your body, and that can cause you death. No, so it can be just a slight condition. Or vice versa, we can look at situations where someone goes through a horrible car accident. The car flips over several times and they break the limbs, the arms and legs and so forth, and yet they make full recovery. So here we're speaking of conditions for the activation of virtue. So you might be thinking that those conditions necessarily have to be great or significant conditions, but it's not necessarily the case.
Oh, did you realize that? Saji nibal ni se saji di lente chisamba sedre lente
cheta samba adila kasa legi yawa
legi yawa aldera
dila de chiwa tu tantan.
Yeah.
Also, one more is asking, what is the difference between positive karma and merit? The less sangwatan sonam se adila keba karionas.
Leda.
Penagewe letan sonam dinila keba karionas.
The givile sama jitang givile ela sonam dojik labchogo asares. Ine sonam gi tsu di namjung anzu sanji ku nishe deyak. Ro zuk jiku drubji gi gyulan drungen telaya ani sonam gi tsok seti. Sonam gi tsok seti. Odila udasta gevi le singi di pigi leya injimi gi chik ani chawajilaya koko kudas ro chawajilaya le singi di chawajilaya
Chensan gewa le tan sonam gi tsodi gyumdre na wochi
gyunde dawji sha chogo girta re.
Well, so positive karma or virtuous actions, we consider that we can also call them meritorious actions in some sense. We can call them merit, for example. But really, when we speak about the accumulation of merit, we speak about the main thing that is responsible for bringing forth one of the bodies of the Buddha. So the set of Buddhahood consists of two bodies of Buddha. There is the Dhamma body of Buddha, the Dhammakaya, and the form body of Buddha, the Rupakaya. So the accumulation of merit is responsible for mainly accomplishing the form body of Buddha. So in order then to collect or to amass the collection of merit, we perform virtuous actions. So in that sense, we can say that positive karma or virtuous actions are the causes for the accumulation of merit.
Je pena gewiles laundi so devu deva yong jinshe sanamadu devu deva yong ge gu cha chawajilaya ani gewiles tendidoj lagu dasra.
When we speak about positive karma or virtuous action, we speak about actions which can produce happiness in the future, right? So they bring about happiness and well-being. This is positive karma.
Ta lelam gi yewa tajitang gi le ani gewa ina chameba le megewa ina pigi tachi drama de chameba yongu yarda ina ya zu di dinalo la ya lelam chu zu temba se dinang zu di zu temba tel ya ani lelam chu se tisung dos.
Now, looking at the next section in the presentation of karma, we've looked at the general characteristics of karma, looking at the 4 features of karma. And now we're going to cover the section of contemplating the specific categories of karma. This section consists of 2 points: the principal teachings of the 10 paths of action, and then establishing actions and their effects. So when we contemplate the specific categories of actions or of karma, we can say that there are infinite ways of behaving in a positive way, the infinite ways of following the path of virtuous actions, and also infinite ways of performing negative actions. However, here from the point of view of the main presentation, we're going to look at the principal teachings on the 10 paths of action.
Terda dinma ta chida yongore da inaya ta lelam chu delaya ani migiwi ani lechu ani ti pambi gi giwi lechu sekta dombe ta nyushu so de chagdo se di yongore da pigi ani dia jil jarsa di ani lunga gi gosum la ya jarni ani lechu gi namsha di sungu yores ta lunga gi gosum la teni lechu gi pigi giwi le da migiwi le cha ma cha dia zo di kolon la ya ro zo di kolon la ya thank yores ro kolon sambu gi toni ani kolon yabu gi toni ani lunga gi namgyur 가르 템바 있나야 아니 개원로야지다 콜롱 마랑와지 토네 콜롱 디에피기 아니 차단 뉴무다야 제위 토네 로 차단기 뉴무단 제위 토네 룽아기 남규텔야 아니 메기빌레스 어디 토는 조고다스라.
Here, this presentation is of the principal teachings of the 10 paths of actions. So we have the 10 paths of non-virtuous actions and the embodiment of the 10 paths of negative actions, which constitute the paths of virtuous actions, which means we have a set of 10 for the non-virtuous and a set of 10 for the virtues. Altogether it comes to 20 paths of actions, which primarily depends upon one's motivation. So to become non-virtuous or to become virtuous, it depends primarily upon one's motivation. So if you have, and the basis for the performance of those actions is our body, speech, and mind. So through using our body, speech, and mind, we have the 10 parts of positive actions, virtuous actions, and also on the basis of body, speech, and mind, we have the 10 parts of virtuous actions. So if our motivation is positive, the physical and verbal expressions that we take using that positive motivation the expression would be virtue. Whereas if a state of mind is not right, if it is crude, if it is involved with anger and attachment, and we act upon them with our body and speech, it means that the expressions that we come up with are non-virtuous.
Teresa kanjin dor dina nama sanji bi chög zawa di semleya ro kolong senamundu semlaya tu devach ra sem gi samlo tandang toni ya vichani ene chu gewa ani malik vichani ani migiwa set rodet tinza ani sem di ani zu sem de la tu den dostaro zu sem de ya tuenza ani tu gyundingi nganzu pigi ta nyamship chiya da masuna zu di ani rangi semlaya ani ta goya ti keshishu chagores ta rangi semlaya tayalaya chik ani semgi pigi sem sengi ti aldamu ngunzin chi tuya de pekeshimura dosro sem korang ngunzin chi matuni sem ngunzin chi vikalaya sem mayin bajilaya sem ngunzin chi rodevana ta digmuda tinza o dindigi nenga rodi ani sem laya tu deva ani chik sem pakpebu ani sem kibu yongyagi tolaya ani zo di rangi namju peji chiya ro pi tu gyundeng ma chik ani shim deya dan ro Daniel nibi lelo segro chik ngin jung mare ngi tu mare chik samsum da nga chik khadab ki ures dindigi samlo di zawni ni ani tam minye bachik chue nyamne chingila ya lodob gugdos ro semshu gugdos tinza an di rig di doktob chiyagi tabshi chi gugosares ro.
So the root of them is our motivation. The root of them is our mind. It is a way of thinking, and that if our way of thinking is positive, it means that what we create is virtue. If our way of thinking is negative motivation, what we create is non-virtue, which means that primarily the actions that we take depend upon our state of mind. So this is what we need to regularly assess. We need to regularly check out what is happening in our mind. We need to keep our mind in check. And in order to do that, we need to identify our own mind. We need to recognize our own mind rather than looking at other things which are not our own mind and thinking that this is our mind or our mind is out there. We need to look internally to be able to identify, to recognize our own mind and to keep it in check. And if you do that, then you can create this state of mind that is quiescent, that is spacious, that is relaxed, that is a good state of mind, which also ensures that you would be able to put your mind to a good use. In order to do that, you also need to have courage in your ability to do that, because if you have a low self-esteem in thinking that I'm not going to be able to do that, this is something that is beyond me, how can someone like me do this, and so forth, this sense of discouragement is called, from a Buddhist perspective, laziness. So rather than falling prey to that sense of laziness, of low self-esteem, we need to develop courage in our ability to take care of our mind. We need to employ means to make sure that we do not develop that sense of discouragement in which we put ourselves down. Shall we leave it here for today? Let's do the final Lamrim dedications. I'm going to do it together. I'm going to put it on the screen. For my two collections, Fast and Space, that I've amassed from working with effort and is practiced for a great length of time, may become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all your lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of completed graded parts of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I've discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going up with great compassion in whatever directions the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined. May I reveal this treasure of happiness and being. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and may the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time by even this graded path to enlightenment completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all humans and non-human beings who have eliminated adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent path never departed in any of the lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practice, may always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may ocean of prosperity spread everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much.